Hey everyone, welcome back to Study Hall. I'm really excited about today's deep dive. We're going to be tackling something I think we all kind of wonder about. The power of media and propaganda. We all know media shapes how we see things, right? But how much of what we see and hear is actually manufactured? And for this deep dive, we're turning to Noam Chomsky. We're looking at excerpts from Media Control and also the Journalist from Mars. Buckle up, folks. Chomsky doesn't pull any punches.
Yeah, he jumps right in. And right away, Chomsky wants us to rethink how we see democracy. We're all taught about informed citizens making choices, yeah. But Chomsky lays out this other view, where the public needs to be...
Managed. So not just regular civics class stuff here.
Yeah.
Does Chomsky say who's supposed to be doing the managing?
He points to guys like Walter Lippmann, this journalist who felt the public was too emotional, too easily swayed to get complex issues. Lippmann thought there needed to be like an intellectual elite calling the shots, keeping the public, who he called the bewildered herd, from messing things up.
Bewildered herd. So instead of citizens, we're more like sheep. Seems a bit harsh. But okay, let's say some folks think that way. How do you even manage public opinion, especially in a place that says it's all about free speech?
And that's where the whole history of propaganda comes in. Chomsky uses this really powerful example, the Creel Commission, during World War I. See, the U.S. needed public support for the war, but there was a lot of anti-war sentiment back then, so they create the Creel Commission, and within months, they totally shifted public opinion.
Really? So how'd they do that? Just plastered pro-war posters everywhere?
It was way more complex than that. They used all sorts of tactics, including fabricating stories about German atrocities. There's this infamous story about German soldiers bayoneting babies in Belgium, totally made up. But it spread like wildfire and just fueled public outrage.
That's pretty disturbing. It's crazy how effective lies can be, but that was ages ago, right? Surely we're past that kind of blatant propaganda now.
Not necessarily. Chomsky argues the methods might be more subtle these days, but the goal's the same: controlling how the public sees things. He connects the Creel Commission's success to the rise of the public relations industry. And what's interesting is that PR folks were pretty open about wanting to control the public mind.
Okay, so instead of outright lies, what kind of tools did they use? Is this where we get into all that spin stuff?
Exactly. Think about phrases like necessary illusions or emotionally potent oversimplifications. It's all about framing, shaping how people understand something, without necessarily lying.
So less about facts, more about playing on people's emotions.
It can be. Think about slogans you hear all the time, like support our troops. Sounds good, right? Appeals to your emotions. Okay. But it also shuts down any serious talk about the policies or the actual conflicts.
You're right. It's like those slogans are meant to make you feel like you can't disagree without being unpatriotic. It's subtle, but it's definitely a way to control what people are talking about. So it's amazing how effective these simple techniques can be. Chomsky gives another example. This time he looks at the labor movement in the 1930s. Didn't unions make some serious progress back then?
They did. That's exactly what caused a backlash. In 1935, the Wagner Act was passed. It gave workers the right to organize. Huge victory for unions. But certain powerful interests saw it as a threat.
A threat? Why would workers having rights be a bad thing?
Well, they felt it messed with the power dynamic. Remember that bewildered herd idea? To some folks, this was a case of the herd getting a bit too independent, and they needed to get things back under control.
So that's where propaganda kicks in again. How did they try to turn the public against unions?
Chomsky describes this thing called the Mohawk Valley Formula. Basically, this sophisticated propaganda campaign meant to make striking workers look bad. They were painted as disruptive, un-American, working against their communities. Classic divide and conquer move.
Wow, so they turned public opinion against these workers.
Yeah.
Who were just fighting for better conditions. Makes you wonder how many times that's happened throughout history, maybe even today, to discredit movements that challenge those in power.
Definitely a recurring theme. And it shows just how powerful media can be in shaping how we see things. Chomsky argues that media consolidation, the fact that fewer and fewer corporations control information, makes this kind of manipulation even easier.
Yeah, I guess if a small group of companies deciding what we see and hear, it's easier to push a specific narrative. But is this like intentional propaganda, some big conspiracy? Or is it more subtle than that?
Chomsky doesn't really see it as a grand conspiracy. He knows journalists have their own biases, but he also points to the structure of the system itself, how it limits different points of view, the need to make money, the pressure for ratings, the influence of advertisers. All those factors play a role in what gets reported and how it's presented.
So not always deliberate, but the system itself can create a kind of bias.
Right. He offers some pretty striking examples, like how the public saw the Vietnam War. Despite the huge number of Vietnamese casualties, the media often focused on American losses, downplaying the real cost of the war.
That's incredibly disturbing. Like, we were shielded from the whole truth. Makes you think, what other uncomfortable truths are hidden by the stories the media tells? What are we not being told?
That's the question Chomsky wants us to ask all the time. He says if we let one dominant narrative take over, we lose the ability to think for ourselves and challenge those in power.
So it's not just about being informed, it's about being informed and being critical. But does Chomsky offer any hope here? Is there a way out of this manufactured consent cycle?
He does. Chomsky highlights the power of dissident movements, those who refuse to accept the mainstream narrative, like the feminist movement, the anti-nuclear movement, the environmental movement. They all pushed against what everyone thought was right and made us face uncomfortable truths.
So even when it feels like the media is totally controlled, there's still room for dissent, for change. It's pretty inspiring to think we can make a difference, even if it feels like we're up against this huge system.
Yeah.
But how do we even begin to challenge that? Where do we even start?
Okay, so we've seen how propaganda works, how it's changed over time, and how it's used to shape what we think. But what can we actually do about it? As individuals, Chomsky keeps talking about critical thinking. But what does that look like in real life?
Yeah, that's the big question, right? Moving from theory to actually doing something, Chomsky really emphasizes the power of language. We need to pay attention to the words they're using, how things are framed.
Can you give us some examples, like when I'm reading the news or watching some political debate? What should I be looking for? Sure. Think about terms like collateral damage or surgical strikes. They're meant to sanitize war, make it sound less horrible. Or when politicians use phrases like tough choices or national security. Those kinds of phrases can shut down debate, make it seem like you're unpatriotic if you question anything.
So it's like recognizing those loaded terms, the ones designed to make you feel a certain way, like they're trying to go around our critical thinking.
Exactly. And another thing, think about the source. Who's giving you this information? What's their agenda? Are they connected to any political groups or corporations? It doesn't mean you automatically dismiss everything they say, but you got to be skeptical.
Like that saying, trust but verify. Do some digging. See if other sources are reporting the same thing.
Yeah. And one of the best ways to fight propaganda is to seek out different perspectives. Don't just stick to the sources you already agree with. Challenge yourself to read or listen to things you might not like.
That could be tough, though.
Yeah.
It's easy to stay in our own little bubbles, surrounded by people who think the same way we do.
It is easier, but it doesn't make us any smarter. Chomsky's point is, a healthy democracy needs a bunch of different opinions, a willingness to talk things out respectfully, even when it's hard.
So how do we find those different perspectives? They're not exactly easy to find.
It takes work, but there are places out there. Independent media outlets, alternative news sources, even just talking to people from different backgrounds, all of that can help us see the bigger picture.
So it's about being proactive, actually looking for information, instead of just taking in whatever's thrown at us like we're our own editors, making sure we're getting a balanced view.
That's a great way to put it. And this ties back to something Chomsky really pushes, media literacy. It's not just about reading or watching the news. It's about understanding how the media works, recognizing their biases, being able to critically analyze what we're being told.
Media literacy sounds like something we should be teaching in schools. I mean, if we're bombarded with information from such a young age, shouldn't we also be learning how to deal with it?
Absolutely. It's more important than ever now, with all the misinformation spreading online. But even if you didn't learn it in school, there are ways to learn it now. Organizations dedicated to media literacy, online resources, workshops, it's all about being willing to learn.
So becoming more media literate, it's like having a superpower, right? The power to see through the spin, to recognize when someone's trying to manipulate us, to make our own decisions based on facts, not fear.
Exactly. And even though it can feel overwhelming sometimes, what we do as individuals, it does matter. We can support independent media, we can talk to each other constructively, and we can hold those in power accountable.
It's empowering to think that even small things can make a difference. We're not just sitting here taking in information. We can be part of shaping the world we want to live in.
That's the big message from Chomsky. It's not about being cynical or giving up. It's about recognizing the problems, learning how to deal with them, and using our voices to create a better world.
That's a great note to end on. Thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive into media control and propaganda. Hope it gave you all something to think about.
My pleasure. Remember to be critical, be curious, and most importantly, be engaged.
And until next time, keep those critical thinking caps on. We'll see you back here at Study Hall soon.